Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to MAAG's 100th event since lockdown. Firstly, I'd like to thank our media partner, Little Black Book, for their support in setting up this event. And before we introduce our special guest, I'd like to just say a few words about MAAG. MAAG is the trade association that promotes and represents independent agencies and everyone who works in them. The independent agency community has been hit hard during the COVID pandemic, and as a result, MAAG has stepped up its support to not only its members, but to all independents, and over this time has made no charge for any of its services or activities. In doing so, we have run 99 sessions and provided support in the areas of mental health, securing CBIL loans, and a range of property matters, to name but a few. We've also set up a community for those in the agencies who've been furloughed to ensure that they all remain connected to the industry. So today marks our 100th event since March the 27th, and we're delighted to mark this century by having Sir Martin Sorrell as our special guest. Sir Martin leads little introduction, but I'll try and summarise the 3 acts of his career so far, as it will help put today's conversation in context. Act 1 saw Sir Martin as a key player in the growth of Saatchi & Saatchi, an agency that, whilst creating campaigns like Labour Isn't Working for the Tory party, was itself working hard, and soon the agency became a household name, showed agencies were exciting places to work, and agencies were businesses that could make money, and lots of it. So Act 2 saw Sir Martin, by then age 40, armed with his experience and a thesis from marketing academic Theodore Levitt, saying that globalization of brands was the next big thing, take a small company, Wire Plastic and Products, adopt a buy and build approach, acquire hundreds, maybe thousands of independent agencies, and built WPP over the next 33 years into the world's largest marketing services group. But the show does not stop there, as on leaving WPP in 2018 comes Act 3 and brings us up to date. This is the creation of S4 Capital, a digital-only agency where Sir Martin, as executive chairman, has over the last 24 months become an agency which prior to COVID was a dollar unicorn, and now 3 months later is a sterling unicorn. And today, literally today, is valued at 1.26 million. When I wrote these notes, originally it was 1.25 million, that was only yesterday. So Martin, welcome and many thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Clive. I don't know how you do 100 events on COVID. Congratulations. Does that mean I'm 75 years old? It makes me feel older. It makes me feel as though I'm 100 years old.
Yeah, well, you're not, because you're still going strong. So where I want to start is that, knowing little about MAAG, you chose the title for today's conversation as Independence versus Holdcos post-COVID-19. Therefore, I've got to kick off by asking, how do you define an independent?
Well, you and I discussed this in our exhaustive pre-webinar or whatever we call this meeting. And I defined it as sort of not one of the 6, the 6 being the 6 holding companies. And thinking about it, maybe you should chuck in Shell and LG Ad as well. I mean, there will be others. So I would define it as not one of the holdcos. And then, you made me think a little bit more deeply about it. And I think we both agreed that the real definition probably is where there is not, underline not, a separation of ownership and control. So for example, at WPP, and this is a dig, and an open dig, the board of WPP, which consists of luminaries, has little, if no, financial interest in the company. I think the board as a whole, 15 or so people, including the executive management, own less than 1%. I don't think it's even 1% of the company. And therefore they have little or no interest, financial interest, in the future of the company. And I think that's a fundamental problem. And it goes back, without wanting to be too academic about it, to my life as a student when I struggled with economics at Cambridge. I got a 2-2 at Cambridge, which in economics, with grade inflation, that would be a 2-1 today, or maybe even a minor first. No, that's a joke. But I struggled with economics, but I did read one book there that made a lasting impression. It was by a left-wing economist called Robin Maris, and it's called The Theory of Managerial Capitalism. And in that book, he highlighted the separation of ownership and control, and that managers had different objectives to the owners because they had no financial interest. And I think that, you know, Warren Buffett and others, Jorge Lehman at 3G and others, have always centered in on the importance of management having a significant economic interest in the business. So my view of it, an independent, as modified by our conversation, is it's not the big six or the big eight if you include the two Korean holding companies. It's really the separation, a non-independent, it would be defined as the separation of ownership and control, and an independent is where ownership and control is one, and where you and I and whoever have a vital economic interest, long-term economic interest, to get stakeholder capitalism into it as well, a long-term economic interest in the company.
All right. So as from one Jewish lad to another, is this a come to Jesus moment? Because you were the guy who created earnouts and probably more P&Ls than I've had hot dinners. Is this a change in philosophy from your point of view?
No, I think at WPP, I mean, I still own 23.5 million shares in WPP, which puts me in the top 10 shareholders, probably in the top 6 or 7, and certainly the largest individual shareholder. So I have a vital economic interest, even though the company has, you know, halved in value since I left. On the day I left, it was worth 16 billion pounds. It's now worth 8 billion. So no, it's not a come to Moses meeting moment or come to Jesus moment, as you unsubtly put it. But no, I think it's an interesting question, because when I was at WPP, you know, we became somewhat famous, or notorious, I should say, for the management incentive plans we had. But every incentive plan that we had, and I participated in, and my colleagues too, there usually were about 19 or so other colleagues in it, about 20 as a whole. The fundamental principle was you put your money where your mouth is. And in the very first plan that we did in 1992, it was the first year of the Blair government, everybody told me I was a lunatic. I put another £1 million in cash into the plan. It was a 5-year plan with matching grants if we hit certain absolute share price targets for 30 trading days. There were 4 or 5 of them, and we hit them within 3.5 years. People before we started said I was crazy because a Blair government was coming in, a Labour government. God knows what would happen to the stock markets. But I fundamentally believed, and my father and I often talked about this, and he worked for somebody else. The sad thing was that he never had his own business, although he treated the business as though it was his own. And I think having an economic interest, you know, mortgaging the family, mortgaging the home, mortgaging your wife and kids, or husband and kids, or whatever, I think is important. I think it changes the mentality, and it makes you much more committed. Otherwise, you tend to look at these things as just a job. And, you know, I don't think you take it seriously. It's like the old Bill Shankly quote, football is not a matter of life and death, it's more important than that.
Sure.
And, you know, WPP or S4 Capital are not matters of life or death, they're more important than that.
So your definition absolutely ties in with the kind of members that we have, because they are owner managers and their mortgages and everything are up against their business. So for that side of business, and, you know, you've gone on record in terms of saying that Holdcos are no longer fit for purpose. What 3 things would you be advising post-COVID for these independents to do in order to make the most of that opportunity that presents themselves?
Well, you know, there are 4 principles of S4, and it's easy for me to say this. I mean, we seem to have chosen the right route. Even the venerable FT, Financial Times, seems to have woken up to the importance of digital. It took them till yesterday, but the Lex column wrote, you know, the click trick, I think it was called, referring to the fact that digital had now crossed traditional in terms of percentage of or market share of digital advertising and marketing. spending. So spending worldwide last year was about $550 billion to $600 billion. This year, overall, it'll be down, say, around 10% to 500 to 550, and 50% of it will be digital, with traditional down 20%, let's say, and digital flat. S4, I bravely predict, will, I don't want to get myself into trouble with the stock exchange, but we've said we will do double-digit top-line growth again this year, despite COVID, which will be remarkable against the digital industry, which they say will be flat or down, actually. I think WPP says it'll be down 2 or 3%, and against traditional, which will be down 15, 20%, whatever it happens to be. So my advice, for what it's worth, would be to follow our 4 principles. One is digital only. And if you have a traditional business, move it to digital as quickly as you can. Number 2, the model that we have is a data-driven model, first-party data-driven model, which develops advertising, digital advertising creative at scale, personalization at scale, dynamic creative, and pumps it out programmatically using all the modern platforms, hardware and software companies. There are about 20 of them. We'll probably go through them in a second, but using them. So that's the second principle. The third principle is faster, better, cheaper, or more elegantly, speed, quality, value. So agility, better understanding that ecosystem of 20 or so companies, and then cheaper means, or more efficient means doing it more effectively. Because in a world that is growing slowly, particularly post-COVID, but even before COVID, post the Great Recession, financial recession of 2008, the companies can't grow that quickly. So there's very little inflation, so there's very little pricing power. So there's a focus on cost, and therefore efficiency is terribly important. So that's the third principle. And the final one is a unitary structure. No fragmenting earnouts. I think that was a good enough model to build a market share driven model, which was what WPP was and Saatchi was. S4 is a growth model where unification of the firm into one is critically important from a client point of view. What clients want, I believe, is the best people working on their business. They don't care where they come from. We may be concerned about our brand names, Ogilvy or Gray or Y&R or JWT or Media Monks and Mighty Hive, but essentially what the clients want is all the people at S4, the 2,550 people in 30 countries being deployed for their benefit. And that's what we have to do. We have to do it in a unitary fashion. And by the way, COVID-19, interestingly, has made us more unified and less fragmented and less fractured. And I think that would be my advice, but that follows our game plan.
Yeah.
I'm not saying there aren't other game plans I haven't thought of. There are.
Yeah. Again, a lot of our members, a lot of people in independent agencies would use the phrase integrated communications. There'll be some clearly who'll be focused on specialist areas like experiential, which fall outside of that model. How does S4 Capital provide an integrated solution, or is it not looking to do that?
No, neither. Integrated marketing doesn't fall out of it. I mean, we're unifying it in one. I think the trouble with integrated marketing, or the phrase, is it implies silos which you try and integrate. We want to eliminate the silos. The thing that kills a business, once we have 200,000 people in WPP, we have 2,550 in S4. You have an integration problem when you have 2 people in a firm. Once you go with one, can you imagine the issues you have when you have 200,000 or 100,000 or even 25, 50? And my view about S4, and I say this frequently to our people, if every one of the 2,550 knew what the other 2,549 knew, we would be right at the top of the industry. That's the key issue. The key issue is getting everybody to work in a cohesive way. The thing that kills companies is the politics of silos, the politics of individuals with fiefdoms, with different P&Ls. You know, we have one P&L at S4. And, you know, the reason we're an independent, according to our mutually agreed definition, is that half the company is owned by people who work. You know, we're capitalized at $1.5 billion now, and half of that company is owned by the people who live and work in the company and their families. So if there's 2,550 people, there's about, if it's an average of three people per family unit, about 7,500 people who depend for their livelihoods on S4. And just think about, just want to make a point about purpose here. If you said to me, what's the purpose of S4? It's to create employment. I'm not ashamed to say that what we're in business for is to create long-term employment, particularly at the time of COVID-19. And you know, getting to the heart of the matter, when the furloughs come off in October in the UK, there will be very significant unemployment. Okay, and we're just postponing a really important point. And this is going to, you know, your membership, you know, if you said to me, what's the thing that they should watch out for most in a UK context, it is exactly that. I really worry about what's going to happen in October. You know, it's like that, everybody mentions this, the cartoon character, Bugs Bunny or whoever it is, or the Roadrunner, who goes over the edge of the cliff and the feet are going round and round and round. That's where we are at the moment. And then in October, whoosh, it all opens up. So that's a serious, serious point. So planning for that, planning financially, from a client point of view, from a people point of view, is critically important.
Okay. We're going to come back to the people issue later. Clearly, in terms of independence, they're looking at various options. There's been greater proliferation over the last 5 years of independence. The IPA and ourselves agree that there's 17,500 agencies now. Things are different. Is this a time for consolidation? And if there was consolidation, what do you best advise these smaller independents to go about, whether acquiring or in S4 capital terms, merge with each other? And is it a good idea?
Well, look, there are a number of people who are starting agencies now, and it's counterintuitive. If you go to Airbnb, Brian Chesky, he started Airbnb in 2008, just weeks or days after the great financial crisis. And people must have said to him, and I think he admits it, you're crazy to start a business. And you know, he had a personal experience in relation to travel and accommodation, and that's where Airbnb came from. And he went ahead and did it, and the rest is history. Actually, ironically, he now has, he's just taken a loan, I think, from a syndicate, including Silver Lake of about $1 billion, because Airbnb has been threatened again by coronavirus. But it's very interesting to listen to, because he started his business in the teeth of a crisis, and he now has another crisis that he has to deal with, although he is operating at a very different level. So you could say crisis is a good time. It's, you know, the Chinese character, everybody says this, you know, it just doesn't mean crisis. The Chinese character for crisis also means opportunity. So it's an opportunity as well. And this change that we're going through, which I think doesn't change anything, it accelerates the trends that we've seen at consumer level, media owner level, and enterprise level, gives you the opportunity. If the trouble with consolidation is that everybody listening to this call, if there are anybody out there listening to this call or watching it, you know, started their businesses because they had that entrepreneurial urge, and they wanted to build an entrepreneurial enterprise and build something worthwhile, not just, you know, to earn a good living, but because they wanted to build something that they were proud of. It is very difficult for people to subsume, in my experience, to subsume that, let's call it egotistical desire, to a common purpose. The common purpose we have at S4 is quite interesting. There are basically, you know, we meet every day, our management, particularly after Corona, 8 of us, and all of us are united, I think, by a common purpose. Well, two things. One is to build a tech-led, very important qualification or clause, subclause, a tech-led new era, new age advertising and marketing services model, because we think the old model is dead, past its sell-by date, not fit for purpose, i.e. the holding company model, which, I was in part responsible for creating, but it's, McKinsey says the average life of a company in the FTSE 100 or S&P 500 is 17 years. WPP has been around for 35 years, so it's had 2 lives. So, but it's not fit for purpose anymore. That market share model, like P&G Detergents or Unilever, where the brands cannibalize one another, and they're cannibalized, not right anymore. What you need is a unified company where people work together. And our unitary structure and our mergers, as you put it, it's always half shares, half cash, no earnouts. Because you think earnouts just breed silos. But the fundamental point, the difficulty with consolidation is that people have to accept that they become part of the whole enterprise. And that means moderating or sacrificing certain, the limits of objectives. It means you have to work together, not in conflict. And that's critically important. And we have, famous last words, but we have, I think, the best team of people that I've ever seen. Certainly as good, let me say this, as good as anything I saw at WPP and anything as good as I've seen at Sargis. Exceptional people, and the subsidiary mission, and this is really important because it's an emotional thing, is to disrupt and disintermediate the status quo, the establishment. That's the twofold objective. So, but when you talk about consolidation, I think you have to have that sort of mission to bind you together. If you don't have that, it becomes a purely financial exercise, and that's the problem with earnouts now. Earnouts, I used to believe at WPP that a 5-year earnout would give us the opportunity to iron out the kinks in a deal, client conflict, people conflict. Unfortunately, if we brought a business into WPP and we aligned it with Ogilvy or Gray or JWT or One or whatever it is, or Group M, unfortunately, human nature being what it is, the managers at each of those vertical brands didn't spend enough time integrating the business. What happens now with our business, so for example, we're going to announce something next week, not a big deal, but in line, another data and analytics deal. And, we've already integrated that company, and there's one afterwards as well in e-commerce. We're already integrating those companies into our structure, even during the due diligence phase, even through the negotiation of the SPA. So what we're doing is integrating it and trying to make it one force. And it's a long explanation, but I think it's really important, Clive, that if people do want to go along the consolidation route, that you bring them together. And somebody just flashed up, and how do you align? The alignment comes from common ownership. Remember what I said, half cash, half shares. Totally respectable for you to cash out half of your interest, to make sure your wife and family are safe and your mortgages and the dog's all right and everything else. That's fine. But join us on a journey. And it's not, if you want to sell your company, go and sell it to WPP or Accenture or whoever it happens to be. We're not interested. If you want to buy in to what we're doing, come join us. That's the fundamental difference. When and I'm passionate about it because it's really important. When I met Victor and Wes at Media Monks, when I met Pete and Chris at Mighty Hive, the first sentence was, look, if you want to sell your business to the highest bidder, you're not going to get the highest brick on the chimney from us. You're not going to get it. If you want to join us on this journey, then you're in. Now, they happen to be in their 40s. And so they're at the younger end of the spectrum, as opposed to me, for example. So we're trying to build an industrial force in the industry that will eventually convert at scale. We have awareness, we have trial, brand awareness. Now we have to get conversion at scale.
Okay. I now want to kind of bring it on to some of the topics that independents.
You're fading a bit, Clive.
Any better?
That's it.
Yeah. Some of the issues that independents are facing all the time. One of which is payment terms. You know, these are smaller companies working with large international businesses who should know better, but they're not being paid on time. We work with Federation Small Business, but there's no legislation. All you can do is saber rattle. What's your view on that, and how might we address it?
I said many years ago that, you know, when I was trying to run WPP, we're not banks. I think it was 2013 or something. We're not banks. Now, the problem with the advertising business, the traditional advertising business in particular, is that it's not, your clients are not asking you just to fund your fees, which might be 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, you know, put creative and media together, it might be around 7 or 8% in total of the billings, with media being about, you know, 2.5, sometimes even lower than that. They're asking you to fund the 100%, the billings. And the reason they're asking you to do that is the clients will not go to Rupert Murdoch or Bob Iger or whoever to say they want longer payment terms. You know, Bob would turn around and say, well, you won't get, you know, you won't be on transmission date, you won't be there if you don't pay. Right? So they use the meat and the sandwich routine, which is to go for the middleman. Now, for the bigger companies, it's possible for them, they have the balance sheets to withstand that sort of pressure. The smaller and medium-sized companies, you know, we're what I would call a small to medium-sized company. We're not a big company. We're, you know, revenues of $400 million, maybe we'll hit 500 million very shortly. So we're not huge, we're not big. And WPP, when I left, was $20 billion, smaller now because of the sale principally of Kantar, but much significantly bigger. And this is where the bigger companies have leverage. Now, I've got to tell you that the incompetence in some of the bigger companies is huge, and I will be very direct about it. Dentsu, an Aegis subsidiary in Spain, I always remember this, gave a Spanish client 2 years credit.
Yeah.
And the client went belly up bankrupt. And I bet my bottom dollar that nobody in Tokyo knew what the hell was going on in Madrid or Valencia or wherever it was in Spain. Negligence. So some of the big companies have the advantage of the balance sheet, but they throw it away. And of course, it becomes a competitive, particularly in media pitches, it becomes a competitive point of differentiation, you know, giving 120 days, 180 days, but it's a zero-sum game. Now, I would let's call the Holdcos, let's put them into a separate category. If they want to create a zero-sum game, let them do it. For small and medium-sized companies, I think it's really wrong. And
it's the clients who are forcing the payment terms, and then even not adhering to those anyway.
Yeah, but the clients shouldn't do it, Clive. The clients, look, I know what happens. The CFOs of the big clients go to their analyst presentations, and the analysts say your debt, your receivables and creditor ratios, your days in accounts receivable or accounts payable are not as competitive as your major competitor. What are you doing, you dummy? Go out and do something about it. And what they go out and they say, okay, let's extend, you know, let's try and collect our receivables as quickly as we can and extend our payables. Now, look, that all fair in love and war for the big boys and big girls, but for the small and medium-sized companies who, after all, are the lifeblood of employment. You know, people forget this. I always raise this in the context of Google and Facebook. People forget, and Amazon, and Alibaba, and Tencent, and probably TikTok. They forget that the greatest proportion of their revenue, probably 60%, we don't know for sure, comes from small business, who in turn are the engines of employment within the economy. That's where the jobs come from. Not all from the big boys. They come from the small and medium, the entrepreneurial companies, some companies such as in your association. So keeping them whole and healthy is really important. The other point is, and this is a practical point, in current economic conditions, that pressure on receivables or payables or whatever is not such a bad thing from profitability point, because interest rates are zero. So for the company, as long as you can overcome the cash flow drain and you could discount the receivable, because a lot of the big companies have these discounting facilities at very low cost, even when interest rates were higher, they've probably come down now, where you can facilitate it. The problem will be, the real problem will be, is if we do get inflation and interest rates do rise, then the rubber really hits the road. Because if you as a small business or medium-sized business have accepted 180 days terms, you're going to be in deep doo-doo, not just because of the cash flow consequences, but the profitability consequences. So you might have a holiday for the next 3 or 4 years whilst interest rates are close to zero, maybe even negative interest rates. But you know, there will be a come to Moses or come to Jesus moment at some point in time when the rubber will really hit the road. So
do you think there should be legislation?
On small and medium size, yes. I really do. You know, that in our prep meeting, I told you, and I was a bit indiscreet, and I won't be that indiscreet in a more public forum. I told you some stories that had happened, and there is a lot of hypocrisy about this point. In other words, there's a lot of virtue signaling in this area, where people say, you know, they agree with my hypothesis, say, let's say about, or our hypothesis about small and medium-sized businesses, and then the way their organizations behave is to squeeze the life, living death out of them. So there is a lot of hypocrisy. So the answer to your question, to be blunt, yes.
Okay. Then the other thing which kind of focused, and I think there are going to be quite a lot of pitches coming up post-COVID as people start to rethink their plans in the new normal, whatever it's going to be. What's the view on pitching, and particularly creative pitching, taking up huge sums of money, which is probably potentially a procurement price fixing exercise? How do agencies respond to that? What's the best way for clients to select their agency?
Yeah, we do pitch at S4, but we have a supply problem. Last year we grew organically at 40-45%, depending on what metric it was. This year we went into our budgets with a 30% target because of COVID. You know, we'll probably do, we've said to the market, we'll do double digits. Let's say we end up in double digit territory, which I think we will. Then look, we've done very well. But basically, you know, we haven't reduced our headcount. We've added to our headcount. We started the year about 2,400. We were out 2,550. We haven't thrown people out. The holding companies will get rid of 50,000 people around the world, and agencies will lose 50,000 people in America alone, Holdcos and independents. So, you know, my view on pitches is, because we have a supply constraint, we're just starting, and we tend not to be the incumbent. So we always tend to be the invader. So if you're the incumbent, it's a nightmare, because you have to run a team to run the trains on time, and you have to run a team for the pitch. So it's huge cost. It's huge money cost. And then the opportunity cost, the time lost, is huge. So we tend not to be in pitches. We are in a couple now, which for us, if we're successful, which I think we have a very good shot. We'll see. I'm tempting Providence, but we have a very good shot. They will be game changing for us. They will be life changing. They will be equivalent to more than 5% of our revenues, which, you know, if revenues are 400 million, is more than 20 million a pop. But those are special cases. We find the pitch process too time consuming, too taxing, and we prefer what we call the land and expand strategy, i.e., we get a project from a client, we do a good job, we get another one, we get another one, we get another. I think, you know, if I was a CMO, instead of having a fancy consultant, which is another, you know, another thing is to be very blunt, a number of the consultants, you know, it's a pay to play model.
Yeah.
If you don't, you know, if you don't have a consulting contract with the consultant or with the event, you don't play.
Yeah.
So you know, if we're talking about, you know, in this age of stakeholder capitalism and long-term sustainability, if we're talking about good and not so good, or good and bad, it's another area where, you know, there's a lot of people talk about transparency of the tech companies. There should be some transparency in relation to what I'm talking about too. So, okay. So I think the pitch process, look, I think to sort out who you work with is fine, but any CMO worth his or her salt will know who the agencies are that are the contenders. If I was a CEO and I had a CMO, I would expect that CMO to know who the good agencies were or the appropriate one. Want to run a competition? Make it short, sharp, and sweet. To your point, the worst examples are the big, traditionally orientated media pitches. I said on Disney, short the winner of the Disney media pitch, and there were two. And if you'd shorted Omnicom and Publicis when they won the Disney pitch, you would have made a fortune. So it wasn't just because of the Disney pitch, but what I'm saying is they do become what you just said, a procurement fest where the lowest common denominator wins, not the highest common multiple.
So not without putting words into your mouth, if there isn't that transparency, there isn't the independent should really just say no.
Well, you know, look, it's easy for me to say that. And I know the pressures that you're under. I mean, one of the problems in the holding company thing, and this is a funny, you know, why is it that the leader on the new business table that is produced by Campaign or R3 or wherever it happens to be, why is it that that leader always ends up with the lowest growth rate? Yeah. They're always at the top of the new business table, bottom of organic growth rate. Why is that? Well, it could be they're discounting it because they're exaggerating the numbers. It could be, but probably because they're discounting. You know, at Cannes last year, John Wren and Michael Roth both said to me, your old shop, as they put it, that's WPP, was heavily discounting to win business. Now, we always the people inside WPP would say, the reason we lost the business or we didn't win the pitch was because somebody discounted in order to win it. So there's a lot of emotion in this. But directionally, it's true. I think, you know, Publicis and WPP have the lowest growth rates, and Dentsu have the lowest growth rates. All three companies have lost half their market value in the last couple of years. IPG and Omnicom have done a bit better. I think they lost about a third of their value. And maybe they don't discount to that degree, but there's something funny that goes on. And it's easy to say, look, don't pitch if you find yourself in a predicament. And I know the pressures everybody on this call are under to win business, to get the headline in Campaign, to get the headline there. That's another problem, by the way. The managers of these big holding companies and the subsidiaries and verticals, they're more concerned about getting the headlining campaign than they are. I mean, I never, in the 33 years, well, not never, maybe one or two examples, but rarely, if ever, got an email. When I got an email about new business, you know, just want you to know, Martin, that we just won this, fantastic. They never put, they would say, we won X, Y, Z. They never said what the billings were, what the revenues were, what the, you know, forget about profitability, just the revenues would be, or gross margin would have been. Never did. Because everybody in our industry is worried about perception. And it's worried about what does campaign think? What does Ad Age think? And it's a zero-sum game. So
Okay.
It's again, separation between management and control. An owner is worried not just about the headline, but about the impact on revenue, bottom line, people, jobs, that sort of thing.
So it needs to be really qualified. Okay, we're coming up towards the last 15 minutes. There are a couple of areas I really want to address, one of which is being talked about a lot, and I just got a quick view in terms of offices. What is being known as, you know, the agency. How do you think it's going to turn out in terms of office space? It's a big area thing on the P&L. Now everyone's been working remotely.
Yeah, well, we had a daily call, as I said, it was yesterday. And we had asked a couple of people who joined us on the call to look at our leases. And we've already dropped leases. I mean, our OPEX in May was down, you know, our indirects were down sharply. And the reason is that we've dropped a number of leases and we've consolidated already. You know, we're trying to build that unitary P&L. And therefore, in any city we operate, we're in 43 cities, I think it is. We still have multiple buildings because we've added, we started with Media Monks and Mighty Hive, and we've added 6 content companies to Media Monks and 4 programmatic and data businesses to Mighty Hive. So we've got multiple offices. So Buenos Aires, we've got 350 people in, I think it's 4 offices. We're now putting them into 1 office. So first of all, COVID-19 has accelerated that integration. I mean, from that point of view, if there's any good that's come out of COVID-19, it's made us more unitary and more coordinated. So that's good news. But on that call, yes, we went down, you know, each city, and where we have more than 1 lease, we're going to move to 1. So, and also the footprint is going to change because the average age of our 2,000 monks, those are the content people, is about 32. The average age of the 550 media people, the Mighty Hive people, is about 25. They tend to be younger. Some of them don't have the space at home. Some of them may be living with their parents. Some of them may be living together as couples and not have space. But generally, I think people want more variable commuting time. And, you know, with COVID, public transport is not such a good alternative. So, you know, there's a move towards electric cars, smaller electric cars and private transport, that sort of thing. But so more variable commuting time. And there are a body of people who don't want to come into the office every day. They say they may want to come in for 2 or 3 days a week. They may not want to come in at all. They may say, several have said to me, you know, we embed people in clients. I'm spending all my time in clients. I don't come into the office. Why do I need an office? A lot of people are saying to us, we don't want to be in San Francisco anymore. We want to be in Denver or Austin. We want to be dispersed in the country or in the suburbs. The city center is too expensive. All of those things, I think, net out to a change. I know I was watching Squawk a couple of days ago, and the head of one of the big real estate companies said, you know, New York, you know, after 9/11, people said they're going to move out of New York. I know 3 people, this is what he said. I know 3 people who went to the Hamptons and they came back in 2 years' time. So that was his sample of 3 on which he made a generalization. I am not sure that that's right. I think this is more fundamental. At the very least, there will be an interregnum, a period of 1, 2, 3, 4 years where people are more hesitant about city centers. So, for example, New York and Chicago lose prominence. Boston, because of technology and biotech, gains. California gains, even though it's very crowded and expensive. LA is certainly, we're seeing a shift from San Francisco to LA and to places like Denver, Boulder, Austin, and the like. So I think you'll start to see changes. And, you know, for somebody like me, who's an old fart, and, you know, I've always been accused of being a micromanager and a control freak, etc. When they call me a micromanager, I say that's a compliment. But, you know, this is part of the problem. You think because you can't see, therefore you don't know, and you worry about it. All the data that we have on productivity is that our productivity has not diminished by being dispersed as we are at the moment. All the data that we have is, look, we may have lost a bit of profitability, productivity and profitability because of dispersal, but on the other hand, varying commuting times or not having commuting time adds to the working day.
So there'll be less real estate and more flexibility in the way in which we work.
Yeah.
Can I just pick on S4 Capital being very much digital only and using machine learning and things of that nature, ostensibly will result in there potentially being less roles because technology will take over. And you said at the beginning, S4 Capital is very much in terms of creating jobs. We're in an industry now which is under the spotlight in relation to diversity and inclusion. And I know that one of your thoughts is very much about creating more roles to allow people diverse. How do you square that with a situation where technology is actually going to be driving jobs out of it? And therefore, what kind of businesses and what kind of roles will be made available to create a more diverse and inclusive workforce?
Well, it's a real problem. It's another very difficult question. But, you know, it was ever thus. I mentioned my economics. Somebody asked what was the book. Robin Maris's book was The Theory of Managerial Capitalism. When I mentioned it on a TV program a few years ago, he reissued it. So there should have been a new edition somewhere. He took me out to Hakkasan for dinner to thank me, actually, funny enough. But also in economics, I labored with John Maynard Keynes's The General Theory, which was published, I think, in 1929. And Keynes wrestled with this point too. What he said was, we were going to take more holidays. Now, it hasn't turned out that way, but the theory was the same. And I'm one of those people, you know, there are many tech people who say improved tech will create jobs. I don't believe it. I think net they destroy. So I worry about that. Now, what do you do about it? Well, and I did something in India this afternoon, and I got the same question afterwards from somebody who was watching or listening. And, you know, I wrote back to him and said, look, first of all, government has to, acknowledging that all these changes that we're talking about cause massive disruption. You know, digital transformation causes disruption. That's why people didn't like it or didn't like doing it. Now, the uncontrolled corporations, the separation of ownership and control, you were worried about your job. You didn't necessarily make the big change that you needed to make for the long term because you didn't want to disrupt the status quo. That's now finished because the status quo has been disrupted by COVID-19. You might as well get on with it. But making that change, it means the government has to do a number of things. It has to educate and re-educate. It has to skill and reskill. It has to provide mobility, ease of mobility. You know, in America, you can make the structural changes much faster because you don't have the social costs involved if you're a business. So it's a harsher environment. There are support systems, but there's also a culture of reinvention that makes, but even in America, you have to do the same thing. It's about hardware and software. I mean, it's apple pie and motherhood. It's about infrastructure. It's about airports and railways. It's about 5G and everything else. So you have to create, and it has to be done not just at the state level, at the federal level. It has to be done by business too. Business, there has to be a public-private partnership, an acknowledgement that technology does create this issue, and that we have to have a much more mobile and much more flexible economy. The problem at the moment is we don't think like that. You know, home ownership, for example, and the importance of it in the UK economy makes people very rigid in terms of moving around. And it's easy for me to say that, but it's a fact of life. So we're going to have to do things. And if you want, you know, long-term worry, I worry that the fiscal stimulus that we've had to inject into the economy to keep us all, the economic heart beating whilst COVID-19, you know, who's going to pay for this? And, you know, it's going to be paid for, despite what the politicians say, in my view, by higher tax, both personal tax, wealth tax, whatever, and corporation tax. You know, in America, Trump took the corporation tax level down from 28 to 21 of 19%. Biden will take it up. If Biden wins the election, he'll bump it up immediately. So capital is a proportion of GDP, which has increased since the 80s. Since Thatcher and Reagan, it's gone like that. And labor as a proportion of GDP has gone like that. Inequality and populism, plus what we're talking about now in terms of paying for the fiscal stimulus, is going to drive taxation up. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's going to happen. That's what I think is going to happen.
How do we address the diversity and inclusion bit?
Well, but part of that yield is going to have to be applied to what we're talking about. So it's not just about addressing the deficit. It's about providing the wherewithal. I mean, you know, Britain post-Brexit has to be, in my view, Singapore on steroids. And again, because of coronavirus, because of the fiscal deficit that we've now got, it's going to make it more difficult for us to restructure the economy with education, reskilling, mobility, etc., to take account not just of the technological change, but the fact that we have to change the direction of the economy away from Europe to the US, China, which is, you know, redirecting the economy to the two, you know, our exports to US and China. That's going to be a really difficult job that the Foreign Office is going to have to deal with. You know, how the devil do you negotiate a free trade agreement with the US and the Chinese at the same time? It probably has to be one or the other. It probably can't be both. Very difficult. But, you know, we're in for, I think, a rocky ride. And the other thing to say in relation to that is that ultimately, geographically, I think the areas of the world with the most promise are what I call the bookends. So North and South America and Asia Pacific. And I worry about Western Europe. Germany, no. Germany is the strong man of Europe, but France, Italy, Spain. And I worry about the UK post-Brexit. I'm a Remainer. I remain a Remainer. But I worry about how we're going to cope with all this or in isolation, if you like. So I look at that, you know, WPP was a third when I left. S4 is 70% North and South America, 20% Western Europe, 10% Asia. I want it to be 40, 20, 40. Not that I want our European business to be the same size. I want it to grow. But I see the big growth, North and South America and Asia Pacific, particularly India and China.
In that answer, which I think addresses the core of it, there was the bit in terms of the diversity and inclusion bit, which we still have to find ways of making it a more which would be about creating potentially more roles. How do we square that bit? Because it's really under the microscope, and WPP announced $10 million a year for 3 years in terms of addressing this issue.
Yeah, and you know, so we've done at S4 we've done, or in the process of doing 3 things. First of all, we announced a matching donation fund of $250,000, which at the same time as saying that, I said that would be equivalent, this is before WPP did it, to $10 million the fund, given they've got 100,000 people, we got 2,500 people. So we've done that. But you know, that's words in a way. I mean, it's money, but it's words. It's action, but it's not real action. The second thing we did was to, and I'm going in ascending order of importance, was education, training, programs against racism, about hidden bias, and you know, just general education about, and trying to get our people to think more about diversity. The most important thing was changing our hiring protocols, and we're already, you know, we're still hiring. You know, we cut out non-essential business, we cut out travel, we had to cut out travel. We did lose some freelance consultants, but basically we've kept the business intact because we think we'll be in a better position as we exit COVID in Q3 and Q4. The holding companies will be getting rid of 50,000 people, you know, 10% of the workforce, whatever it is, and we'll be primed, ready to take on business. So we're still high. So at the beginning of the year, we were 2,400 people, we're now 2,550. So we're continuing to hire through COVID. Now, we've changed our hiring practices. We've made it compulsory to take as broader, and you know, and we've set it into targets. We're setting it into targets for our people in terms of their incentives, both qualitative and quantitative. That's the fundamental job. Fundamentally, Black Lives Matter will succeed if the pattern of jobs is changed, not on a qualifications basis, because if you look at the percentage of graduates that are Black, it's tiny. It's if the black population in America is about 13%, I think it is, of the total population. We at S4 in the US are about 38% diverse. We're a highly diverse company, but our Black representation is about 4%. The national is about 13, as I said. New York is 24. Now we're concentrated in California. We have about 550, 600 people in California. And the Black population there is about 3-5%, depending on which part of California. San Francisco, I think, is around 5%. So we're highly diverse. We have a lot of Latin Americans, a lot of Mexicans, a lot of Spanish. So highly diverse, but we're not, if I can put it like this, Black enough. We must increase the number of Black employees inside, and our policy now, our recruitment policies are oriented to that. So we will set quotas, we will set targets, and that's where it has to be. And the final thing is, I was on a call where the CEO of a Black CEO of a well-known company in America is organizing a coalition amongst 120 companies in America, United States, to create 1 million jobs for Black employees. That is the key. And the second key is procurement. The second key is to get companies to procure their services, supply chain, whatever. You know, we've seen it with gender diversity. We at S4 are roughly 50-50. We've done much better on that in the last year or so, but we still have further to go, particularly at the senior levels. But we have to do it through changing the pattern of jobs. And the final point is, the jobs have to be allocated on a skills base, not on the basis of qualifications. Because if you try and do it on qualifications, the supply of black graduates in America is just not there. So it will change. It will change. It will change.
Okay.
I tell you one very interesting thing. So we've been doing some research, and before, I think around before the Second World War, a number of Jewish emigres, highly distinguished, I think Einstein was one, highly distinguished professors were thrown out or left Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and they fled to America. And they were not allowed into white universities. And they ended up, Einstein was one, they ended up in black universities because they welcomed them more than white universities. And I think I'm right in saying that Einstein went to one of the black universities, ended up eventually at Princeton. Eventually, he was respectable enough to go to Princeton. So, was ever thus.
Okay. Look, our time is up because under these protocols, you tend to get limited for an hour. Before I thank you, and many thanks for everything you said, my old boss used to say, you can't leave without trying to get the order. So my last question to you, Martin, is, are you now a champion for the independent agency community? And if you are S4 Capital ready to join the MAAG?
Yeah, yes and yes.
I'll take that as a sale.
And
Thank you very much.
The other thing I should say, Clive, is anybody on the call, because I noticed I caught some of the comments. If anybody wants to ask a question, martin@s4capital.com. martin@s4capital.com.
I'm sure your inbox will be flooded.
Well, I'm just trying to find out how many people actually had the patience and fortitude to listen to this stuff.
Well, it started just under 200, and we're now at 136. So, having done 100 of these things, or not been on all of them, that's a pretty that's a pretty good record because you get much higher dropouts. So it's been fantastic. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Pleasure.
I know that you're now going to West Coast time, so you've got a long day ahead of you probably still. But thank you very much indeed.
Okay, thank you.
And your
And
wisdom.
good luck. Thank you
Okay,
very
thanks a lot.